there has been an increasing politicisation of the Muslim identity in Britain. I think Islamism is a poison. It's a poison in Britain, it's a poison in the Middle East.
You grew up in the Northwest, in Oldham, and obviously the political eyes of the country are trained on the Northwest at the moment because of the Gorton and Denton by-election. As someone who started their political journey broadly on the left, as someone who's worked for governments seeking to ensure that alienated working-class voters could feel that they had a patriotic government that was on their side, what lessons do you draw?
Well, it's an area I know a little bit because my family have some connections to a mosque in the area. So I know that strip, the Stockport Road, quite well. And it is a very diverse area. I think it's fair to say it feels quite run down in some parts of it. So a lot of the general dissatisfaction with government, particularly in the last year or two, I think are quite stark in that constituency. I mean, all by-elections are really a message to the incumbent government. And I think it will be a huge amount of anger and frustration about the current government, the disappointment from a lot of people. As you say, reform, polling, at least in some polls, are ahead. The complication is that there is a very large Muslim vote in that area. It's I think about a third of the voters are Muslim. And therefore the Greens are very active. They're campaigning in mosques. They're obviously campaigning on the issue of Gaza, which has detached the Muslim vote from Labour quite significantly. So even though this is a very strong, traditionally a strong Labour seat, the Greens are very likely to be able to mobilise a high turnout from that group. So, I mean, what are the lessons? Well, Labour are under serious threat and they have lost, to some extent, quite a large part of their voting base in that area, potentially to the Greens. The thing that we can't predict, I mean, I'm not an expert in judging from the polls, but whether Labour can mobilise sufficiently the anti-reform vote, has this been happened elsewhere? And even though Labour are saying, well, reform are ahead, doing very well, we need to get the vote out. We're the only party that can beat reform. That's their main sales pitch to the voters. It's not a very inspiring one. No. It's not really about what have Labour achieved, what do they want to do. It's more, let's stop these guys from winning.
British Muslim voters traditionally were one of the constituencies upon which Labour could most rely. Why do you think there's been a rupture between British Muslim voters and Labour?
Oh, well, the straightforward answer is the recent events in Gaza. But I think it's been happening for quite a long time. Actually, if you look at the constituency I grew up in, Oldham, there has been quite a lot of dissatisfaction with the local council. There's a lot of sort of internecine fighting as well in that area. And a sense that Labour have probably taken that group for granted. They have been, and the Conservatives have also done this to some extent in some constituencies, and not just a Labour phenomenon. But the tendency to go to the leaders of the local religious communities, to curry favour, to try and build a voting base through them, that has worked for quite a long time, but it's started to fray now. And once people switch their vote, it's a bit like having an affair. Once you've done it once, it's easier to keep doing it. And that has started to happen, that people have realised that they don't have to vote Labour in order to influence what's going on. And the Greens are going to capitalise on that. The independents that were elected in the 24 election have also shown that there is an alternative to Labour. So I think that sense of both being taken for granted, things are getting worse. I mean, actually, lots of Muslims are just motivated by the same things as everyone else. Cost of living, the energy bills are going up, the cost of butter is going up. They're really frustrated that the area looks run down. They're also frustrated about the rise in immigration and illegal immigration, which affects them because they live in poorer areas where that has a bigger impact. So all of those issues, Gaza is probably the lightning rod or the thing that sparks that detachment. But it was the currents have been there for a while.
Why is Gaza the polarising and energising issue that it is? If I were living in Manchester, I might be worried about public transport. I might be worried about inflation. I might be worried about poor housing. Why should I worry, other than in a general humanitarian sense, about what's happening in Gaza?
For Muslims,
yes,
in particular, I mean, Well, Muslims and parts of the left.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, why has Israel and the Palestine issue been a significant concern for the left and for Muslims for decades? It is just one of those facts. It is felt very, very deeply by a lot of people. It's also been, to some extent, mobilized by people like George Galloway, who have used it as a way of saying, Muslims are being oppressed around the world. And therefore, if you are a devout and serious Muslim, if you care about your wider community, then you will vote in any way that will influence foreign policy in the UK. I think that has been quite a kind of well-established tendency.
And do you think part of it is an attempt by some to say that people's Muslim identity, and therefore their solidarity with brothers and sisters who are suffering in Gaza, is more important than their British or Manchester identity and their concern about interest rates and bus routes?
I think that is part of that. That is the tactic that's being used, particularly by people like Galloway and some of the independent MPs. I don't know if that's sufficient in itself. I think if you had broadly a dynamic economy, lots of jobs being created, the bus routes were working, then maybe that wouldn't have such a galvanising effect. But it's the fact that everything else is going so badly wrong. They're fed up with Labour anyway. And this issue evokes a great deal of emotion. Is it the case that Muslims in this country are more preoccupied with their religious identity? I mean, we don't have enough real in-depth research to be able to judge that. But it does matter more. Religious identity does matter more to Muslims than perhaps other religious groups. And it is more politicised than for other religious groups.
Within that, one of the concerns that I've had is that the government and organs of the state, whether that's the police or local authorities, have a very, very poor understanding of the different traditions, values, ideologies within British Muslim communities. So there's a tendency to say Muslim, but not to think about different religious traditions, whether that's Barelwi or Deobandi, not to think about parts of, for example, the subcontinent that individual families might be able to trace their grandparents back to. There's a difference between someone whose grandparents might have come from Kashmir and someone whose grandparents might have come from a different part of Pakistan or indeed from India. Do you think there is that lack of knowledge there? Does it matter?
So I started writing about radicalisation of Muslims about 20 years ago. For Policy Exchange, I wrote a report which argued that there has been an increasing politicisation of the Muslim identity in Britain. And bizarrely, that the more extreme ideas were more popular amongst younger people than older people. So this was a kind of modern phenomenon.
People who've been brought up and educated in England.
And their parents tended to be more small c conservative and kind of be more preoccupied by, the old-fashioned kind of communal politics and, national identity. But the younger generation was more preoccupied by religious identity and Islamism. Still minority view, Islamism, the political form of Islam, more extreme form. A lot of that was motivated and provoked by, the World Trade bombings and the subsequent wars. But that was becoming a phenomenon 20 years ago. I think it's now much more widespread. I think it is a serious issue. I think Islamism is a poison. It's a poison in Britain, it's a poison in the Middle East and many other countries. It is also vying against more moderate forms of Islam. And I think to answer your question, the authorities in this country, local authorities, the police, are very easily captured by a particular part of that Muslim community, which is at the more extreme Islamist end. So that's not to say that everyone the police talks to in a local community setting has extreme ideas. Many of them are just, kind of moderate, normal people with, concerns about, local issues that affect them. Without wanting to sound conspiratorial about it, there are groups that are just simply trying to use their influence with the police, as we've seen recently in the case of Birmingham, to try and get results that they want, that benefit them, and to dominate how Muslim communities think and talk about certain issues. So, the Maccabi Tel Aviv case is, absolutely has just exposed how this works.
And there's a sort of tactical operational weakness on the part of the police or local authorities in taking extremist advocates as proxies for the whole of the British Muslim community or communities. But there's also a deeper question, perhaps, which is, why is it that for many younger British Muslims, Islam is a more important part of their identity and Islamism is an appealing ideology? If there's a failure that can be laid at the door of British institutions in allowing that to happen, where does that failure lie?
Oh, I think there are many different organisations that are probably responsible. I mean, so there's a bigger phenomenon, which is the geopolitical phenomenon, which
Yes.
the Islamism has been growing around the world. There are organisations in other countries that have been deliberately trying to stoke tensions. You know, the Muslim Brotherhood have proxies in Britain and elsewhere that are trying to turn the Muslim versus the West story into a dominant narrative, and they've been quite successful. They have therefore then been abetted by slightly naive organisations like the police, who have these sort of community liaison type relationships with local leaders and various groups, not doing proper due diligence, not checking what these people have said online, believing a bit naively that, you know, their intentions are to, you know, build community cohesion and so on. And it's their naivety that has allowed lots of these people to come into, you know, these sort of local government meetings and,
Yes.
and parade to the rest of the community how significant and influential they are. And therefore they've developed quite a cosy relationship in a lot of places. It's definitely the case with local authorities that a lot of, and some of this is well-intentioned, they want to engage with ethnic groups in their area, ethnic populations that are perhaps a little bit more removed from the democratic process. And understandably, in the 90s, 2000s, there was an effort to sort of reach out to them. And these so-called community leaders come forward and say, well, you know, we can give you access. You can come and speak at our mosque. You can come and speak at our community centre. The problem is that the more that authorities try and talk to Muslims through these intermediaries, and the more they emphasise the difference that the different kind of distinct concerns and interests of Muslim people, the more they stoke that sense of Muslims are separate to everyone else. And that, I think, is a process that has now led to all these ill effects.